Welcome, everyone. So nice to have lots of people here today and to be talking about boundaries. And what I'm going to ask you to do is if you have any questions while I'm speaking, if anything comes up for you, please just put that in the chat and I'll definitely get to those questions at the end of the session. So I'm going to aim to teach and to share some really, really helpful frameworks for how we think about boundaries for about 30 minutes. And then towards the end, we'll have another 30 minutes to do some Q&A, perhaps even coaching, and we can talk through some of the examples that you have in mind. So the first thing that I want to share with you is that there's actually only one thing that you need to know about boundaries. And if there's one thing that you take from this session and you ignore everything else, it is this one thing. And that is that boundaries are not there to control anybody else. They're not there to change anybody or change anybody's behavior. Boundaries are there so that we know what we will do in certain situations so that we can protect ourselves and protect our needs. So that's the one thing I want you to remember. Boundaries are not there to change people or to control other people, because what you will probably already know is that doing that is not even possible, because they get to decide what they will do and how they will change or how they will behave. So it's not about controlling other people. And I want you to think about, just take a moment to think about how much time do you spend, even if it's subconsciously, on trying or wishing that other people would change? How much time, how much mental energy do you spend, even how much conversation do you spend where you're talking to other people thinking like, oh, they should do that. I wish they would do that. They shouldn't cut me off in the traffic. I want you to think about how much time is spent wishing other people would change and wishing that they would change their behavior. Wishing that they would act a certain way or give you something that you really, really want, or do something for you, or fulfill a need, or to make you feel a certain way. I want you to think about how much time is spent on that. And I also want you to think, why? Why are you thinking about that? Why do you want them to change? Why do you want them to act a certain way? Why do you want them to, do the dishes? I'm just thinking in my frame of reference. Why do I want my husband to stack the dishwasher or to do it in a specific way? And if you were to ask that question of yourself and to dig deeper and dig deeper, what you might find is that the reason why is for you to feel a certain way, for you to have something that you need. That's the reason why we want people to do what we want them to do, is you want to feel a certain way. And the truth about life is that actually the only person who can make you feel something is you. You have 100% complete control about how you feel. And no matter what anybody else does or doesn't do, it's not going to impact how you feel until you have a thought about it. And when you think about what they do or what they don't do, that's when it creates a feeling or fulfills a need that you're looking for. And if you're waiting, because that's the problem, right? Is that a lot of people are waiting for people to fulfill the need or waiting for people to make them feel a certain way. If you're waiting for that, I'm going to tell you right now that you are going to be disappointed most of the time. And you probably know this already, because people don't do what we want them to do. Even if we request it of them, they may not do the thing that we want them to do. And even if they do it, they may not do it in exactly the way that we want them to do it. And then we're left feeling disappointed. So we want to remove some of that disappointment and some of that frustration. And we want to bring back that control and that power over what you can control in these very frustrating situations. So I'm going to share with you some of the common challenges. So we're going to start almost like at the end, like what are the common challenges of setting a boundary? So the common challenges that I've spoken about already is that we want to control other people. And actually, boundaries are not there to control other people. They're there to give us what we need. We're also thinking that maybe others are going to give us what we need, but that's not the case at all. Boundaries are there to fulfill a need or to give us what we're looking for, to help us feel a certain way. But some of the common challenges that we're thinking that we can control people with a boundary, or that we think is if we create a boundary, or if we create a request, or even if we create a consequence, that they're going to give us what we need. And that's not the case at all. The other common challenge that comes up a lot is that we sometimes don't set boundaries, or we don't enforce boundaries, we don't follow through with boundaries because we have this want or need to be liked. And again, if you were to ask why do you want to be liked? Actually, what you might find is that there's something that you need in this specific situation. So I want you to keep this in mind, that boundaries are not there to control other people. Boundaries are not there because we are going to then get people to give us what we need. And boundaries are not there to be liked. We're not there to be liked or to people please. And I'm going to answer some of these questions around maybe why we want to be liked, or why we're doing people pleasing behavior. So the reason, like I said, for having a boundary is that we want to protect some of our needs and requirements. And one thing to remember is that very often these will be different for everybody. Everybody has got different needs and requirements in order for them to be their best. So you have to look at this in the context of what you want, what you need, what's going to enable you to be the best version of yourself, to live into the potential that you see for yourself. So you might want to consider boundaries around your time, perhaps even how you handle work communication, after hours, what you'll do in meetings if you're not needed, how people should contact you for urgent things. There's also physical boundaries. So, in a work context, do you shake hands or do you hug? What are you comfortable with there? What about your desk area? Do you want people encroaching on your desk space? There's so much from a physical perspective. A lot of us also agree that there's a boundary, like don't hit me, otherwise there will be a consequence. Emotional boundaries. If somebody shouts at you, what will you do? What are you going to do if you feel upset? What about emotional triggers for you? There are lots of people who have experienced traumatic events in their life, and they have emotional triggers in certain situations. What is the boundary that you can put in place to protect yourself in those situations? And then there are also mental or psychological boundaries that you can think about. Perhaps it's, you won't engage in office gossip, or perhaps there's something around a belief that you wish to uphold from a religious perspective, or spiritual or political, that you're not going to engage in those kinds of conversations. And then I also think that there are financial or asset boundaries, things that you wish to protect from your finances or with your assets, or even, with your house. That's maybe a physical boundary as well, but what are you going to allow in your house? Will you allow smoking or not smoking in your area, in your house? All of these things you can use as a context to consider what boundaries you may wish to put in place. Now, very often we think that the boundary is the answer to our problem. Oh yes, we're having lots of frustration, or this person isn't doing what we want them to do, therefore we should put a boundary in place. Or we'll think, I'm really having some challenging a challenging time at work right now, maybe I should put a boundary in place. But I'm going to offer you 4 options. A boundary is not always the only option. And I kind of think that this might even be a step-by-step process that you can follow in order to discover whether a boundary is the right solution for you in a specific situation. So the first thing that I'm going to offer is that maybe you can manage your mind around something. A lot of people hate it when people cut them off in traffic, or don't let them in when they want to get into when they're
I'm
coming
at
up.
my best in traffic.
You're not your best in traffic, Craig.
No.
No. Exactly. And I do mean that generally. It is something that happens for a lot of people, right? Is it something that you can manage your mind around? Is the issue that's happening, is it worth the effort of reacting to it and getting frustrated about it? Is it also worth the effort then of creating or enforcing a boundary? If it's really important, maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And if it isn't, maybe there's something else you can do that's within your power instead. Maybe you can manage your mind around it, and maybe you can find another solution for yourself in that situation. I then think that the next step, if you're not getting what it is that you want or need in a specific situation, is to make a request. And one of the common issues that I find is that people think they need to be enforcing boundaries or even saying that people have encroached on their boundaries, that they've violated a specific boundary or done something that is unacceptable, that the individual thinks is unacceptable. But actually what the problem is that the person doesn't even know that that was the thing that they wanted in the first place. So you've got to ask yourself the question, have you communicated what you want and need in a specific situation? Have you made the request? And I know with leaders, they often say to me, yes, I told them. And I always ask the question, well, how many times did you tell them? How many times did you ask them? How many times did you make the request? How clear was it? Because some people forget. All people forget. If it's not important to the individual, they are likely to forget. So perhaps you may just need to make the request again, or make sure that the request is incredibly clear on what it is that you specifically need or want. If you think that the issue that you're facing is not going to be solved by one of those two, then the next step is to maybe look at a boundary. And boundaries, like I said, are there to ensure that you're getting what you need or want in a specific situation. And they also teach people how we want to be treated. They teach people how we want to be treated, but they also teach people how we are going to show up in a specific situation. The next step, because everybody says, well, what if in my team, somebody's actually just not performing, they're not doing what I want them to do. The next step is to perhaps then consider if there's a consequence. Maybe this is a situation where you want to enforce a consequence for them not doing or delivering on what it is that they need to do. And what is that consequence? And I'm not going to get into the details of consequences, but you want to be looking at what are the things that are non-negotiables, what are the absolute non-negotiables, and also what, another question to ask this off, or almost like a constraint to figure out what should be a consequence, is to say, what is the minimum standard that I have for this specific person or for this team? And then perhaps what is the consequence if they don't fulfill on that minimum standard? All right. So those are the steps to figure out whether you need to create a boundary. But we are going to hone in on boundaries here, because I do think that there are lots of opportunities for us to think about boundaries and to think where we need to be putting them in our lives to actually create more space, more freedom, and to get what we need within our control. Okay. So the first thing to do is to identify where you need a boundary. And there are some questions I'm going to ask you, but I want you to think of this as almost like a feeling. If you're tapping into some of the feelings or emotions that you might be experiencing, where are the ones that are very uncomfortable for you within a work environment? Where do you feel consistently uncomfortable or frustrated or angry, or where are those places of discomfort for you? Because that's going to reveal what might need a boundary. Here are some other questions that might be helpful as well, is what are you asking for constantly and not getting? Maybe there needs to be a boundary there. And you might want to write these questions down and then do this exercise for yourself afterwards. What are you apologizing for often? Maybe there needs to be a self-boundary put in place there. Where are you most frustrated? Where do you often get frustrated or feel frustrated or even angry? Where do you often feel a drain in your energy? Maybe there needs to be a boundary there or earlier in the day so that you don't get to that drain or feeling of exhaustion. Where do you feel emotionally exhausted? Maybe there needs to be a boundary around something there. Where do you feel like you're overextending yourself, giving more than you have available? And I know this comes up so often because I know leaders and overachievers and overperformers, everybody that's in this session today, I know you all want to be incredibly helpful and to do what's required, not even what's required, to do what's, you want to go over and beyond. You want to deliver exceptional results. And it's very easy to get into a position when then people expect that of you all of the time and you're not able to give that. So where do you think you might be overextending yourself? And where do you also feel uncomfortable? Maybe there's an uncomfortable conversations that you don't want to be having. Okay, so ask yourself those questions, do this process, and figure out where in your life a boundary might be necessary. And then you're going to create the boundary, and I'm going to show you how. And one of the things that's really helpful is to decide the boundary now when you are in a great frame of mind to be thinking about boundaries, and not when you're in the moment, when you are frustrated, when you are feeling angry. Don't do it then. It's not going to be helpful. So decide now. Or if you find in the future, tomorrow, next week, you go into a meeting and suddenly you feel uncomfortable and frustrated, or something's happening for you, remove yourself from the situation, take some time and space to think about it, and then go, hang on, maybe I need to create a boundary here. Rewatch this webinar and go through the steps and create the boundary from there. But decide when you're using your prefrontal cortex and not when you're in an emotional space. Decide from a place of service or love. I like to use the word love because that's how I feel towards all people, but you may not be comfortable with the word love. So I'm going to say decide from a place of service. As a leader, even if people are being or not doing what you want them to do, or even if you are have an expectation of them, you are still in service of them. You are the one that's leading them to achieve into their potential, right? So you're always in service of them. So decide from a place of service what the boundary will be, what you will do in a specific situation, and how that might be in service of everybody, not just of you. But don't create the boundary from that place of anger or frustration or defensiveness, because that will always come across when you deliver the boundary as well, when you communicate it. And you want to be creating boundaries for yourself and for others. So not just boundaries for other people, but also what are some of the boundaries that you want to create for yourself? I actually think a lot of the boundaries that we need to put in place are ones that we need to create for ourselves, not for other people. That's just a little hint there. So you may want to focus on that. And then come from a place of love and care and service for yourself, if you're going to do that. And then when you communicate about it, I like to call it the 3 Ks. I don't think that's going to fly. I don't think that's going to live a long life. It doesn't have such a good ring to it. But just for now, just humor me, the 3 Ks. Clear, calm, and kind, right? You don't want to be nice. You're not nice. You don't need to people please. You're just kind, and you're clear, and you're calm. And that is how you communicate a boundary. The other mindset to have when you're communicating your boundary is to know that people don't need to be happy about it, and they also don't need to change. They don't need to change. This is about you. They may not be happy about it, but this is about you and what you need in a specific situation. And then this is the formula to create a boundary. If you blah, 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 then I will blah, blah, blah. If you send me emails on the weekend, then I will respond to them on Monday. If you call me after hours, then I will ignore your phone call. I have a boundary where, and this is actually more from a personal perspective. So I have a boundary where I know, so this is also a self boundary, right? So if I blah, 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 then I will. So one of my boundaries is if I don't feel like going to an event, then I will not go. And the boundary that I've set for myself is that it doesn't matter if the event is 1 minute from now, I will cancel. If I do not feel like I have the mental, emotional energy to go to it, I do not go. Now, people are not happy about that. They sometimes think I'm rude, but I know that that's what I need in the moment. So I'm very happy to have that boundary. If I or if you, then I will. It's all about this. It's all about controlling your power, what's within your control, what you will do in a specific situation. And then it doesn't become a command. It's not about control. It's just stating what you will do in this specific situation. You could supply a reason. A reason is optional. You could supply a reason if you want to, if it feels good for you to do so, but you also don't have to. Boundaries are there about creating more for you, because when you feel better, you do better. That's just how it works in the world. But it's about really looking after you. When you can look after you, you can then look after everybody else in a way more energized way. You also don't always need to communicate a boundary. So if someone is shouting at you, you can just leave the situation. If that doesn't feel good for you, just leave. Or you can communicate. If you raise your voice at me, then I'm going to leave the room. Just so you know. All right. The next step is to apply the boundary. And the better word is actually to enforce. It does sound a bit commanding and controlling though. So I was really looking for another word here, because I don't want it to, it's not about controlling or commanding, but it is about sticking to your boundary. Maybe that's actually better. How to stick to the boundary. And sometimes this is going to be hard. People may not like it. That is okay. And you may find that you've created your boundary, you've identified your boundary, you've created the boundary, you've thought about the formula. If someone does X, then you will do Y. And then you get to that situation and maybe they're shouting at you, if that is the boundary, and you freeze and you forget and you don't know what to do. Not a problem. You get to practice and try again afterwards. Or what I find is generally helpful is just remove yourself from the situation and then say, I'm so sorry, I need to process something. I'm going to come back to you with my response. You don't have to have the answer in that moment. You can always come back to it. People may not like your boundary. People may be shocked, especially if you haven't enforced boundaries in the past and you have been in a habit of people pleasing or not saying no in certain situations, so they may be shocked about it. But if you're communicating it from a place of service and of love for yourself and for the other person, also knowing that they don't need to change or do anything, the way you communicate is going to be so much more empowering too. It's coming from that place of real care and love. I know you may not like this, but I'm not going to attend your event today. Yeah, that's it. You don't even have to say sorry. You don't even have to say why. But you just communicated from a place of love and service. The thing is, if you do not create boundaries in your life for the places where you feel consistently frustrated or consistently drained, what tends to happen is the anger, the frustration builds up and creates a lot of resentment. It creates a lot of resentment, a lot of frustration, a lot of unprocessed emotions that are really, really negative. Do you want that? Or do you want to go more towards your truth? That's the question you need to ask yourself. Do you want to be more of who you are? Because that's where your value will be, is in that place. If you're sitting with a lot of resentment and frustration, you're going to be retracting and not giving as much of yourself as you can. And probably not being as creative as you could possibly be, as innovative, as inventive, as valuable into the world. So I love this question. Do you want a life of resentment, or do you want to just go more towards your truth? When you're going towards your truth, people may not like it. They may not like it, but the people who do like it are going to love it. They're going to respect you because you respect you. And you get to decide what you make it mean. If somebody is not happy about it, you get to decide what you're going to make it mean. So a lot of people have said to me in the past, that's really rude to cancel and not go to the event. To be fair, I do this a lot. If I'm not really ready for a specific event or lunch at a friend's house, when I say I do this a lot, not that often, but it has happened so often. It's such a clear boundary for me. And they say to me, "You are rude. How could you do that? You're so rude." That's not what we do in the world. Doesn't matter. It's what I need. And I get to decide that I'm going to make it mean that it's coming from love. Like, I love and protect me. I'm the only one who will protect me. Nobody else is coming to save me. Nobody else is going to give me what I need. I need to be the one that does that. So it really sets you back into the responsibility that you personally have for your needs and how you feel. Okay, so the next steps. This is what I'm going to recommend. This is the process of how to create boundaries. Firstly, you want to be able to identify where you might need a boundary. You might want to decide that it isn't a boundary. You might then decide it's a boundary and then create one, communicate it, and then apply it and practice it. But in terms of the next steps, here's what I'm going to offer. I recommend is focus on one boundary for now. Just one thing that you want to practice and put in place. Go through this process and ask yourself the question, what is the area that creates the most frustration for you right now, or creates the most drain on your energy, the most mental or physical exhaustion for you? And create a boundary there. And then practice enforcing it. And what you might find is that it's not as bad as you think. When you start getting clear on what it is that you want, you actually will find that people are way more receptive than you realize. Okay, that is the end of the teaching. So now I'm going to open up for questions, and I see that there are some questions already, and then let us go there first. So Kaija says, you mentioned a self-boundary, and if you have any other questions that have come up for you now, please put them into the Q&A box. Thank you, Kaija, for your question. You mentioned a self-boundary. What is that, and does it differ from a regular boundary? Are there different types of boundaries or simply different approaches depending on what the boundary concerns? Yes, I think there are different approaches. And the way that I've figured this out is that sometimes when I'm looking at a specific situation that has made me feel uncomfortable, what I might find is that there's actually a rule for me to put in place or a boundary for me to put in place as opposed to one that I need to communicate with someone else. So I would say that a self-boundary is more about if I do something, then what will I do? If I'm feeling tired, here's an example. If I'm feeling tired, then I will take a break. That is a self-boundary that I have in place for myself. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So here's the adaptation is when I realize that I'm feeling tired, then I will take a break. And that is my self-boundary. And sometimes when we've done that, then it actually releases some of the other frustration and other things that are happening in our lives, which mean that we don't need to put boundaries or enforce a boundary with someone else. The other thing that I want to mention is that I do think that very often when you go through your specific situation and you get to when you get to thinking about some of the situations that you're going through that are causing frustration for you, what you might find is that it's solved just with step one, when you're able to manage your mind about it. And maybe that is also part of this process, is just understanding, what am I thinking about this situation? Is it actually something that I want to be spending time on? Is it actually something worth being frustrated about? Or is it something that I can just relinquish control over and let go? Kaja, does that answer your question? Let me know if there's any follow-up questions on that one. Hawken says, how might I approach a situation where one of your colleagues at work have set boundaries that you believe will limit your own development and or the development of the team they are in? Oh, that is a very interesting question. Hawken, I need to ask you, can you give me that example? And you're welcome to come online and to ask your question with video. And yeah, if you can give me that example on how you think it would limit their development specifically.
Yes, I was. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I didn't want to give an example because I feel like I tend to sort of just focus on the specific of that example. But
Yeah.
one thing could be, for example, if you are in a hybrid work environment and
Mm-hmm.
say there's a team of 6, 7 people, and they've
Mm-hmm.
decided as a team they're going to be in the office on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then one person on that team decide that, no, actually, Friday doesn't work for me. I'm going to be work from home and come into the office on a different day. This is
Mm-hmm.
a very simple example,
Sure.
but that might be that Friday is the day where they were actually maybe typically the end of the week. They do more of their creative work on that day. So it would
Mm-hmm.
actually be great to have the whole team together. But because this person is then working from home, it might limit their ability to do that. I'm not sure if this is even a good example, but that was the
Yeah.
kind of thing I was thinking. If they've set a boundary and say, no, actually, Friday doesn't work for me for whatever reason,
Mm.
and it could be that they have a good reason. But I guess my question is, as a leader, how would you recommend kind of approaching that kind of a situation
Sure.
to try to get to the bottom of it? To say, is it harming you more than you're gaining from it? I suppose is what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe that is the question, is it harming more than you're gaining for it? What do you think?
Yeah, I guess sometimes though it's and you can ask, of course, the person that question, but I think sometimes it's the self insights might not be enough to see where you can see. As typically, if you're in a leadership role, you can see things maybe that they can't see themselves. So it's
Sure.
how would you communicate that?
Sure. Yeah. And maybe that is also just about then communicating the why. So if you think that it is going to harm the situation more than it will um, uh, support the situation by them being off on a Friday, then maybe it's just really about communicating why and moving into that request, right? So you move, it's not something that you want to manage your mind around, because we can also just say, is it really going to limit the development of the team? How might it limit the development of the team? How might it not limit the development of the team? There could be some options there to look at. Then we want to move into the request step. You can make a request and just say, hey, I really want everybody to be here on a Friday. These are the reasons why, and this is why I think it will be beneficial for not just for you, but also from the team. Remember, coming from a place of service and not necessarily from a place of changing the other person. They don't need to change their mind either. But just coming from a place of service, is there an opportunity to show them that this actually benefits them in some way? But communicating that why and being really clear in that communication is helpful. And then if that still doesn't necessarily work, you as the leader always have the choice to create consequences and minimum standards in your organization. But you get to decide where that's appropriate or where it isn't appropriate. And if you think, like a lot of organizations around the world are doing now, is they're saying, let's get everyone back into the office. If you think that that's exactly what you need, then you can create the minimum standard and enforce that with a consequence as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's good, and it's very much the idea of what you said before in terms of coming from a position of kind of service and love. So it's kind of looking at it's for their own development. And as I said, I'm very cautious of going into specific examples because I didn't actually have an example in mind here. It was more if you see someone setting boundaries for themselves and you're thinking, oh, that's I'm not sure if you thought this all the way through. It's just how to approach the situation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really great example because there are going to be people who are going to do things that we don't like and also that we don't think is actually beneficial for the greater team. And then we've also got to, as the leader, make that decision. But think it through. Like I said, think it through. Is it something, how can I manage my mind around this first? I always think that's a great step. Is there something that needs to shift for me here? How do I think it's limiting the development? Or how do I not think, maybe it's not, maybe there's an opportunity here that it's not limiting the development of the team, but maybe it is. And then if you can't do that, move into the request phase, being very clear, very calm, very kind, and also coming from a place of service. And you may in that instance want to communicate why. If you're very clear on the why, it's then so much easier to communicate why to the team or to that individual, and then they may realize something that they hadn't realized before. But if that's not necessary and if that's not an option for them, then you may also want to consider that consequence level as well, if it's something that is a non-negotiable for you.
Yep. Thanks for that. I think the options you got there, I think that makes a lot of sense as well, because sometimes I think it's easy just to go straight to one of them instead of having thought of all four. So.
Yes, exactly. And I do know that a lot of leaders also, in our minds, we have these situations and we're like, oh, we've got to put a consequence in place, or we've got to it's the fight, flight, or fright approach. We're like, oh no, we've got to flee from this situation altogether, and there needs to be a consequence here, or there needs to be something, especially from an HR perspective. There's so much that happens. Oh, we need to enforce a consequence here in some way, and that's not always the case. But going through those steps might be helpful in your mind. All right.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Anna asks, what do you suggest doing if someone doesn't accept your boundary? So Anna, I just want to quickly ask, what do you mean doesn't accept your boundary? If you don't mind.
As in you've communicated clearly what your expectations are, but they have a different. So I'm thinking of something in my personal life right now. Right, my partner's obsessed with buying comic books, and he's just bought so many comic books. I'm like, stop buying so many comic books. Like, it's really annoying me because it's just taking up so much space. But he doesn't have the values when it comes to like clutter and that I do. So he's just got a different perspective on it. And I kind of think you've answered my question anyway, because it's about either having a consequence or having a minimum standard or adjusting my minimum standard. But like, someone else just sees the world differently to you, and you don't necessarily have that sort of power over them. So what do you do?
Yeah. So remember, this is not about changing their behavior, and you know, you've made the request, it seems, and they haven't changed the behavior. So here's the formula. If you continue to buy comic books, then I will what?
All hell will break loose. Yeah.
Okay. So remember, that sounds like it's coming from a place of frustration and wanting to change the other person, right? So we've got to step into the place of service and love. They don't need to change. Your partner doesn't need to change. He doesn't need to stop buying comic books. Doesn't need to do any of that. But what are you going to do to protect your need in this situation? And maybe let's ask the question, what is the need that you have in that situation?
I just love minimalism, and he
Minimalism.
doesn't fundamentally. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I can suggest a few options. Is there something that's come to mind that is coming from a place of love for him and for you?
We can put them in a way we can put them somewhere out of sight, but we live in Paddington. We're very, very restricted on space here.
Okay.
There's not much
Right.
space.
Yeah. If you continue to buy comic books, I'm going to put them in the cupboard. If you continue to buy comic books and they no longer fit in the cupboard, I'm going to give them away.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Okay.
There could be multiple things here. It might not be that. But also, yeah, so you like minimalism. What is it that you want to feel with the minimalism?
Calm. I like things just being in their place, calm, not clutter everywhere. It makes my mind clear and able to think.
Okay, all right. And is there an opportunity that having the comic books is not what creates the calm? Having the comic books in sight is not actually what creates the calm.
Having the comic books inside, I'm not sure I understand that one.
Okay, so let me ask it in this way. So what if it wasn't the comic books being in your sight that isn't creating calm? And it's about what you're telling yourself about the comic books.
Yes, it likely is. Yeah, it likely is I'm attached to it negatively.
Yeah. And what is it that you think when you do feel calm?
There isn't that rumination on these external things. I don't think about any of that. Like, I don't look at my cushions in the living room in the same way.
Okay, interesting. And what is it about the cushion? What do you mean you don't look at your cushions in the same way?
Well, I don't look at them and think they don't need to be there. I don't want them there.
Yeah. So what do you think about them?
I just don't think about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're just useful items.
They're useful items. Okay. And perhaps your partner is thinking the same about the comic books.
Yes, that's the problem.
So there's an option to explore and see, is there anything that you can do to manage your mind around it? Is it something that's worth creating this frustration for you? Is it something that you're willing to just relinquish a little bit of control over? Or what is within your power here if you want to create a boundary for it? If you continue to buy comic books, we're gonna allocate this space to it. This is our shared space. I'm happy to agree that we'll have a cupboard for it, or this shelf for your comic books. If they continue to exceed the shelf, then we're going to need to get rid of some of them.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Lots of questions. Kaja has mentioned, I will call them if I boundaries instead of if you boundaries. Yes, if I do X, Y, and Z, then I will. Yeah. Olaf, in terms of boundaries, setting up a boundary can and will conflict with someone else's boundaries, either enforcing or upholding. That can become quite. Is that something that then leads to just managing your mind?
I mean,
Tell me, Olaf.
yeah, that can become quite tricky. Sorry, I'm not sure why I didn't complete the thought there.
No worries.
You've got two boundaries. Everyone, both parties feel that, it's a very valid boundary, but they can conflict. I think Mark, and very similar question to kind of very in that same sort of spirit where you like, these are the boundaries we've set up, and they're like somebody else on the team or another manager, another person sets up another boundary, and they will conflict. So
yeah,
it's one of those things where, consequence or no, they are just gonna and like dealing with that is tricky.
Yeah.
It always feels like there's no way forward on some of those though.
Okay. And the other thing to remember is that if other people are setting boundaries, it's also likely that you're not going to like them, their boundary to protect their boundary for them to protect their needs, right? You may not like it. And the only thing to always step back into is what is within your control. What can you do to protect what you need in the situation? And when we're not always going to get what we want, life is definitely not fair. And I will never ever say that life is fair. And to be trying to get fairness is just going to be a losing battle, and we will always be disappointed. But we can then say, yes, you have that boundary. If you have that boundary, then I will, in order to get my needs in place. I'm going to give you a very odd example, and it's about the NHS, because I had a recent experience where I needed to get hold of my GP and I just couldn't get hold of them, and they they had their limitations about how I could see somebody, and I needed to see somebody urgently, and they said, no, we can't help you today. And I was incredibly annoyed and incredibly frustrated. But it's about stepping back into the formula to saying, okay, if you cannot help me today, then I will. And what I uncovered, it took me a bit of coaching and some time. What I uncovered is then I will need to find help elsewhere. I will need to get what I need elsewhere. It's just a weird kind of boundary that pops into my mind now. Then I will go and find another way to get what I need, the help that I need right now. And it's just what boundaries really help you to do in this context where you don't need to control anybody. It really helps you to step into what is within your power, and also taking back power instead of feeling frustrated and disappointed and hopeless a lot of the time.
T, can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Is there merit in, I get setting a boundary. Is there merit though that you should probably still keep a lens on trying to shift your mindset? In other words, a boundary might, for me, if I look at it, it might be applied to a frustration that might not be combating the mindset shift that's required.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. 100%. What I have found is that over time, the more you're able to do this piece, the fewer of these you need. And actually, the fewer of these you need as well.
Yeah.
Right? You get a lot more efficient with that. And also, doing this step is way faster than all of the others.
Yeah.
For sure. So it's a very powerful step that's why I say it's almost like a step. I would start there. Is there something that you can manage your mind about? It may be something that you are incredibly resistant to managing your mind about. There may be, there are a lot of people who have experienced trauma in their lives, history and things that have happened to them where this is a very difficult thing to do. And so you may then want to move on to the other steps or to in setting a boundary. But I do think that, yes, managing your mind is a very powerful tool to mitigate some of these frustrations. Yeah.
Terez, extending that ever so slightly.
Yes. Hi, Prince.
Is it not good practice to start thinking about putting an expiry date on a boundary, right? And go boundary on, and then I'll put an expiry date, which forces you to then go back to it's expired. Let me go through 1, 2, and 3.
I love it. Yes, I think that's a really great concept, an expiry date. Never considered that before. What I have had considered in the past is say, you know, boundaries need to be adjusted constantly. We need to consistently be looking at them, reviewing them, changing them, assessing our situation, and maybe adding new ones, changing them, adjusting. But I love the idea of an expiry date. Great idea. What would you say would be a good expiry date? Do you think that there's a set expiry date to assess these and go back to step one?
I don't think there's a standard, right? Because I'm going to tie on to something you said, right? If you've gone through something traumatic, it's really difficult to say the standard is 2 weeks, right? If I'm going through whatever difficult budgetary planning cycle at work, there's no point saying my boundary is going to take 12 months because you're done with that boundary. With that,
Yeah.
and it's a bit of that, and I think so. It's like it's almost as you go into the boundary setting, going, what's the horizon of not the problem's not the right word. What's the horizon of this particular situation? It's something I've been feeling anxious, frustrated about for 3 years. There's no point setting a boundary of 3 days because that's not going to work. And so on and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, perhaps it is something that you then consider as an additional piece. Like, what is the boundary when I'm going to review this? What is the date that I'm going to review this boundary and see how it's been working, review it. You're thinking like a real project manager here. After action reviews and all of those things.
And Prince, maybe to help with that time limit, we could actually go, well, what are the actions I need to put in place to almost feel that boundary can be lifted, or I've actually dealt with the frustration? That could actually be a good mechanism.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, reviewing it and coming back. Can we do this differently? Can we do it more efficiently? All right. Neil asks, interesting angle, good approach whereby someone outside of the team is setting boundaries of what your team can or cannot do. Is as simple as the manager of my team, I'm going to take responsibility of the work they are doing and managing workload. Then I will, what would I say here? Okay, Neil, maybe just give me a little bit of context.
Sure. So thank you. I've actually been I've actually been thinking through your process, and it may be an example where I'm falling foul of wanting to please others. So by somebody else coming in and stating something that limits what the team can do, my knock-on fear is, oh, but that means I can't supply, or the team cannot provide X. And so maybe I need to self-reflect a little bit more. Actually, so I've just been listening to what you've been saying since I wrote that. But it is an interesting challenge, though, whereby there may be a situation where there is an invalid, or when it's not about service, but actually someone else trying to impose their own boundaries onto, in a work context, an area of your responsibility.
Yeah. Sure. And there may be a fear, like you said, when we have this boundary and we're thinking through a boundary, there may be a fear that it's going to have an impact on the relationship or what it is that we need to achieve. It is definitely worth working through what that fear is and why we have that fear. Is that a valid fear? What could be the options that will come out of it? It's likely that, I'm just thinking about it from I'm trying to think of a specific context, but if we were to say to somebody, if you call me after hours, I'm not going to answer your call. We may have the fear that they will then not like us or call us anymore or engage with us or be more approachable, right? But actually what might happen, the other angle, is that they will then respect and treat us in the way that we are, knowing that we're going to offer them a way better service from when we do actually handle their call, knowing that we're not going to be taking their call out of resentment and annoyance. We're actually going to be there in service of them, giving them their full attention when we're able to take that. So, I mean, I know that's a very simplified example, but I do understand that when we're setting these boundaries, that we might have a fear of how people will react. And that's what keeps us not setting them or enforcing them. And actually, it's about just working through, is that a valid fear? Is there maybe another outcome that can come from this that might even serve everybody? I do think by setting boundaries, they are in service of everybody. However, there may be some things where people just don't like them. Yeah, it's just about working through that.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for the question. Oh, Kaija asks a great question. How are the comic books useful to your relationship? Oh, very powerful question. Turn the comics into cushions. Prince, incredible. Anna, it makes them extremely happy. The horizon of a situation. Really like that as a thought. Amazing. There have been some fantastic questions and great sharing. Some really good helpful insights and suggestions and questions, and I thank you everyone for a great session. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. I also just want to let you know that Socium 10X is about change and about helping people through change, and we do that with the lens of ensuring that people are brought along for the ride and that we're understanding people on a much deeper level, helping them make big changes faster, being more efficient, and not necessarily holding themselves back with frustration and some of the things that that we can just easily solve through things like boundaries, managing our mind, etc. Thank you so much, everybody. If you have any other questions, you know where to find me, and I will see you next time.
Thanks, Terez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.